Hello and welcome to today's European SharePoint Office 365 and Azure Community webinar. My name is Shane and I'm delighted to be joined by Andrew Murphy, VP Sales EMEA, and Jake Dennison, Senior Solutions Engineer at Nintex, who will be talking to you today about Nintex, Nintex and Power Automate, the relationship demystified. Remember to join in the conversation about today's webinar on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @EuropeanSP and our hashtag is ESPC21. Don't forget to check out the Resource Center. This is updated daily with the latest blogs, ebooks, webinars, and how-to videos. Simply visit sharepointeurope.com and click the content link at the top. ESPC21 Online was a phenomenal learning experience, delivered by the top experts on the planet. Now, by popular demand, we are delighted to introduce the ESPC21 Online On-Demand Pass. At just €79, hit rewind today at sharepointeurope.com. After the webinar, we will have a questions and answers session. Type any questions you have in the questions window. Questions will be selected and answered at the end of the presentation. This webinar will be recorded and added to the Resource Center, where you will be notified by email when it is available. And now I'm going to pass you over to our webinar presenter, Andrew and Jake. Hello, Andrew.
Hi, welcome. Thank you for having me on today's session. Give me 1 minute. I'm just going to share my screen. There we go. So thank you very much, Shane. And as mentioned, I'm delighted to be joined by Jake today, who will be taking us through some positioning on live demo that it'll take through, because we're always keen on seeing technology in action. And what we want to talk to you today about is Nintex and the Power Platform and when to use which. So I've personally been using the Power Platform for many years, alongside Nintex, both in the K2 stack and also in NWC. And what I want to do today is to take you through sort of my experience and my viewpoint on when to use which platform. If we start off just on what Nintex does, so for those of you who don't know us, really, we are all about improving the way people work through process management and automation. So we have technology that enables you to go and start at the beginning of your journey, map out all your processes, collaborate on understanding what you should go and automate, through to the automation technology that will then go and take your processes, enable you to automate those, enable you to add in things like document generation, e-signatures, analytics, etc. Around that. But for today's session, because when you've got these two technologies sitting around, where you've got the Power Platform and Nintex that provide a lot of capabilities, I wanted to focus it down, Jake and I wanted to focus it down into these core technology areas really for today's session, which is around the automation piece. And so the two items that we're looking at on how they work together are Power Automate and Power Apps for form-sided process automation, and Nintex Workflow Cloud, which is our cloud-based workflow platform. Now, what are the areas that I'm going to talk to you about? I've put it into these 4 sections. So I'll start off with, well, who goes and builds these workflows and forms? When you want to automate your processes, who are the people that are going to open up the tooling, and who's going to go and build those, and what are the personas that I believe apply to those? Then I'll move into, okay, well, what is each platform great at? Because each platform has got areas which is absolutely brilliant at, and then it's got areas that it can do. But I want to focus on what is each platform great at. For those of you who know me, I really believe that when you bring great people and great technology and apply it to what it's great at, then you can achieve great things. If you try and bend tech to what it's not great at, then life gets difficult. So I want to give you my viewpoint on that. I take a look at how each platform has been used today, and then go into a little bit of the detail around, okay, well, when would you use Nintex Workflow Cloud? And then I'll hand over to Jake to show you. So let's start with focus area number one, which is the who. And for me, this is about saying, okay, well, let's go and say, I'm going to hand over some tooling to people. What skill sets do they need? Now, we all know that varies. So for today's session, I've broken it out into simple classification that says, well, if your automation requirements, and in this case, your process automation requirements, are simple, or are they medium, or are they complex? Then what do I see as being the audiences that can come and use the tooling? If you've got simple requirements, and so that might be something along the lines of, I want to be able to go and monitor like a shared drive. So whether it's Google Drive, whether it's Box, whether it's OneDrive, I want to monitor one of those and get notified when a new file arrives. That is simple process automation, and really that is open to all audiences across both platforms. Dead easy to do. IT savvy users can get involved, IT pros, developers, etc. And that's the case in Power Platform, and Power Automate, Power Apps, and in Nintex as well. When we move into the sort of medium complex type solutions, so this would be an example where we might say, okay, what we have is we want to take contract management, but we want to take it from the point where we are gathering T's and C's and the details of the contract in order to then go and build the contract. We are then also going and putting that contract through a series of multi-level approvals. And then we are generating that contract, we're putting it through digital signatures, we're waiting for the response back, we get that back, and we put it into SharePoint document library. That is a sort of medium complex type requirement. And for me in the Power Automate, because of some of the things that we'll cover off later, really that requirement cuts out the IT savvy users and moves into IT pro and developers. In Nintex and in NWC, the tooling has been particularly geared towards those sorts of scenarios to make sure that we can keep the IT savvy users involved in building those sorts of scenarios. Then we move into complex, and complex are scenarios where you start to do things like, well, I want to go and help people to go and do engineering change management across, for example, automotive industry type processes, where you've got multiple teams of people who are getting involved. You've got multiple systems that you're going to go and integrate with. You've got validation logic and quite complex logic that sits on the forms for your data capture piece. So, great data in, great data out, and vice versa, the other way around. And in the Power Platform, that's when really you have to be a developer for some of those constructs in order to achieve those complex scenarios. And again, in the Nintex tooling, that has again been geared to let you level up to keep those IT pros involved in those complex type solutions as well as developers. And so, for us, depending on the complexity, depends on what roles people can get involved in. If we move beyond the who into, okay, what is each platform great at? Power Automate and Power Apps are phenomenal for personal productivity apps. So some of those scenarios that I mentioned earlier, hey, let me know when a contract has arrived in a folder for me. Let me know some of the examples that sit up on the gallery. Let me know when my boss emails me. But more importantly, let me share this Excel spreadsheet with a couple of people and let us collaborate on that and put a bit of information around how we're managing that. That works really well. Simple approve reject workflows. So if your requirements on sending out tasks to people to review work, etc., are quite basic, so simple approve reject, brilliant at that. If this then that scenarios, which is really sort of where Power Automate, when it was Flow back in the day, came from, phenomenal. So if you want to listen to a system, and then when something arises, if you want to then say, okay, well, if this, then do this, and if that, do that, really good at that. The logic flow works well inside of there. System to system flows, also really good. Lots of connectors in there, lots of ability to go and get context on information and and parse that a bit and then move it from around system to systems is pretty good. Obviously, Office 365 centric processes. So for those people who are living in Office 365, interconnecting into that ecosystem, living inside of things like SharePoint Online, etc., it's really good and geared up towards those sorts of solutions. And particularly when you head into sort of the Power Apps type world, it's pretty good. From an Nintex perspective, our target audience is to take that and enable you to broaden out the kind of solutions that and automations you're doing for your company. So to take that up into departmental type processes and company-wide type processes. So the kind of things that we help people with are, for example, things like, so that end-to-end contract management, to let you go and do things like manage engineering change management, which are critical for your organization. Let you go and manage things like back to work schemes and safe working. Let you go and do end-to-end contract redlining. Those sorts of processes, which are not the if this then that type things, but are things that are going to run your department and run your company. Other areas, so particularly in the context of Power Automate, really good if you are looking to build things and you want to connect to other systems where inside of Power Automate there is only premium connectors. So inside of Nintex, a lot of connectors. When you subscribe to Nintex, all of those connectors are available for you without additional fee. So you don't have to pay that premium connector piece. So good for those sorts of scenarios. Also, from a better together play, quite often we see Power Automate and Nintex being used together, right? So on the if this then that, NWC is a really good option for extending what your Power Automate flows do for those more complex scenarios. So, or for the ability for people who are not developers to get involved in managing and building those more complex scenarios. So it's really good for extending those. NWC is much better at managing processes that include, in particular, people. So when you're looking for those more advanced approval processes than just approve, reject, that's an area where Nintex Workflow Cloud comes in and does a really good job over and above what Power Automate does. Then there are other areas as well. So we find in a lot of companies we work in, yes, people will be sitting and working inside Office 365, but there are quite often subsets of people that are not. They're living inside of other systems like Salesforce, and what they need to be able to do is to go and have one set of processes and one platform that is providing the capability for both of those ecosystems to live together inside the organization and work together inside of the organization. That's really good at those. We then shimmy into how are the platforms being used today. So what I did is I've gone across to the Nintex Workflow Cloud Solution Accelerator Gallery and had a look at what are the solution accelerators that are being downloaded and used the most by our client base for NWC. And if we have a look in here, there's things like manage end-to-end employee onboarding, manage end-to-end vendor onboarding, manage all of your document generation and approvals, manage work from home agreements, manage governance across Microsoft Teams, manage pay text protection application programs. So you can see the kind of things people are using NWC for are those full end-to-end departmental and company-wide process automation stack pieces. I did a similar thing on the Power Automate template library. And what we find is the top picks in there, because this is what it's really great at, are things which are those sort of personal productivity and enabler apps type pieces. So things like when the status in a task planner changes to complete, notify a channel, notify a team when a file is added to SharePoint, save a message into OneNote, and then some team-based stuff. For example, post a welcome message when somebody joins a team. So these are really those amazing if this then that type scenarios, which it really excels at and is incredibly easy to get going on, which on this level enables people that would never be able to do that if they weren't developers, just to come in and click a few buttons and build these small productivity apps within minutes. It's phenomenal at that side of things. If we then go and have a look into some of the detail as to say, okay, well, with that framework of who should use it, and what kind of use is it being applied to, then we have a look and say, okay, well, when do I believe that we should use NWC? So quite easy on the platform side. If there are non-Office 365, Dynamics 365 based type processes looking to automate, NWC is the choice for you. End users who do not use Office 365, Dynamics 365, etc. So if they're sitting inside of other systems, NWC is a standalone platform that integrates into Office 365 and others seamlessly. That's the platform for you. Then when we go into specific use cases around process automation, there are a few key things to look at when you're deciding automate, Power Automate, or NWC. And a couple of those are, are your processes long running? So do they last longer than 30 days? So inside of Power Automate, you've got processes expire after 30 days, and audit logs expire after 30 days, and associated tasks, etc., will expire after 30 days. And that's great unless you've got processes that have approval cycles or they run longer than that. And you don't want to have to go and factor that into your build. You just want it native out of the box. Some of the advanced features that you might need when you are involving people, and lots of people in the process. So task delegation, allocating work out to conditional groups, etc. The ability to go and manage some of the more advanced logic and flow needs that quite often you'll find in business processes that you're automating. So things like branch by stage is very useful. Change stage are things that will just help make sure your processes don't become quite bloated. And processes that are quite intricate so far as intercompany transfers and stuff like that. If you want them to be built and updated by non-developers, then NWC is a great tool for you. And likewise, if your flow is easy to understand and built by non-developers, then it will be understood by non-developers. So if that's something you need, then that's important. A few things around tasking. So again, life's never simple. You send something off to somebody and for sure you get asked a bunch of questions. In fact, I'm going through this right now on a remortgage, and they are not using this, and I can tell you because it's really painful. But anyway, so the ability to loop back for tasks, for example, more advanced approval actions on tasks, the ability to manage when you set variables within inside of the workflow. So not just at the beginning, initialize them, not just at the beginning, but throughout the process makes life a lot easier for you. Document generation is a real power piece that sits inside of NWC with our DocGen engine. Just dead simple to go and do and generate documentation. So on process, those are some of the call outs I have there. On forms, so here we see, okay, well, in NWC, it's just seamless to go and integrate, initialize your start forms and your task forms within inside of the process. Same audience for building them, no dev skills required to go and build those. Responsive out of the box. You don't need to pre-pick the type, whether it's mobile or tablet, just off you go, and offline support provided for those. Also, the skill sets I mentioned a minute ago, but the skill set to go and build those forms when you go beyond the very basic, you don't have to be a developer to go and build those. You can still be somebody who is IT savvy or an IT pro. So you're not having to worry about code-based element interaction. You don't have to worry about code-based expression, code-based validation. It's just it's very simple. Navigation between screens is also very, very simple, and there's no need to understand sort of data binding principles and stuff. It's just kept really easy for people to go and build those forms and update those forms. So if that's important to you, then you should be looking at NWC. Then on the extension side, in NWC, there's a huge amount of work that's gone into both out-of-the-box connectors that are a part of the package, so no premium connectors there, as well as the extension platform and gateways to on-prem data. So if you're looking to extend without potentially upping the total cost of ownership, then NWC provides the ability for you to connect to those systems without increasing cost, create custom connections without increasing cost, and use our on-prem gateways in order to go from get access to your cloud data. So some examples there for when to use NWC, and I'm hoping that drives a few sort of questions and follow-ups for us later as well. So what I'd like to do now is say, well, let's go from the sort of talk track into, let's take a look at some of NWC and the Power Platform working together. So I'd love really now to hand over to Jake Dennison, who will then take us through that. So if I can get Shane, if you could pass control back to Jake. Jake, over to you.
Thank you, Murph. That's fantastic. Bear with me a second. Let me just share my screen. Hopefully that should show up.
Got it.
Got it. Perfect. Okay, so let's go straight into it. So before we go into the demo, what I want to do is cover everything of what Murph's just said and show you real world aspects of that. So I've created a very simple, straightforward process that I'm going to guide you through now very quickly in the slides before showing you in a real world example. So within this scenario, we have 4 different actors. We have a requester, so this is you, this is who's going to initiate the process, and the process we're going to follow is a travel request. When I raise that travel request, I'm going to have an approving manager. So my manager in Azure AD is going to approve that request and move forward. All of that perfectly acceptable, perfectly possible within the Power Platform, and that's obviously great. Where things tend to diverge, and this is where NWC sort of comes in, is in steps 3 and 4. So step 3, obviously, we're going to follow to a travel agent. So they're an external third party. They're not authorized in our system. They're not a person who can log into our SharePoint. So they're not going to be able to receive any tasks. But they need to provide some information. So they need to book the travel and then send us the data on that. We're going to use NWC to be able to do that. And we're going to gather information for them through an Nintex task. And finally, we have a finance team. The finance team only work inside of Salesforce. They don't use SharePoint. They're not going to look at SharePoint, and they want the information from this workflow inside of their Salesforce environment, but they also want to do it seamlessly so that they just have it as record inside their system. So the systems themselves we're going to just very cover over just to make sure that it's all very clear what we're going to look at today. On the left, obviously, we have SharePoint Online. This is where we're going to be storing the primary records, and it's also where we're going to use Power Apps. Power Apps is going to be the forms technology for the start form of this workflow, and we're going to use it to raise a request. So this is going to be the end user redeployable forms that we can have all over the business. Then we're going to lead to a Nintex Workflow Cloud and Nintex Forms. So once that Power Apps form is raised, we're going to immediately start an Nintex workflow, showing you just how simple and how easy it is to even use both of these platforms together, should you like to do so, because a lot of our customers absolutely do. They do use both platforms together because they each have, like Murph said, their own strengths, and that's absolutely perfectly fine. And then finally, we're going to take a very quick dive into Salesforce to show you that it has the capability of obviously interacting with that side as well. So to very quickly just demonstrate which areas we're going to use, we're going to do in step 1 is primarily only in SharePoint and Power Apps. Step 2 is going to be done in Nintex Workflow Cloud. So is step 3 and step 4. So that's all of the approvals and notifications, so all the workflow aspects of the process. And then finally, we'll finish up using Nintex Workflow Cloud to update Salesforce. So with that, let's minimize the screen. So on the screen, I'm in a SharePoint environment, and I have my travel requests SharePoint list here. I've created a Power Apps form and replaced the standard SharePoint form. And I'm quite proud of this. This is one of the first forms I've ever made using Power Apps in a long time. And I've done a few different things. So I've set a couple of things that I think were very interesting in the way that the design works. So setting the default people picker field to whoever's raising the request. That was a very interesting process to kind of follow through. And I've also set some default values further down and done some travel requests. So as I pick options, I'm going to do a customer meeting. I need to meet, if I could spell, a customer to discuss a deal. I'm going to pick my travel date. So I'm going to go next Monday. And we're going to only go for 1 day. So that's something as well I've done in the Power Apps form. I've been able to calculate the difference in days between the dates, which is quite a nice thing to do. Location, we're just going to say is London. The airline we're going to pick is British Airways. Estimated airfare, we're going to say 190. Hotel name, Marriott, because, you know, big dreams. Let's have a look. So we'll just say 300 for the night, and then save that. So obviously, once I've raised that request, we immediately want that to go to a manager for approval. So obviously, within the actual process itself, I have these tracking options here to say whether the manager is approved and whether the booking has been completed. So I'm going to jump over to my manager's view. So we've done the initiator part now. Now we need to go to manager. So in this scenario, my manager is not Murph. It's actually a guy called Richard Rowe. So as we refresh, hopefully Richard Rowe's email will come through. But the actual Power Apps form itself, I think, is very good. You have the ability to deploy forms very rapidly. You have the ability to build pre-made forms that can be put across the business. They're very simple to actually start out and can be done very well. And for my organization, works perfectly fine. And I'm able to actually build this very easily with minimal training. So we're going to give this a second to kind of load through. There we go. So this is a Nintex Workflow Cloud task that's been raised to my manager. So if I click on this, we're going to load through now to a Nintex form. So a little bit of a difference. The cool part is all of the information that was originally raised in the first form is now available to me now in this Nintex form. So all that information obviously was taken through and passed through to me. I can either look at this information and choose to approve and reject. So based on this outcome, something's going to happen. Obviously, I'm going to approve so that we can continue down the demo. So that's that first step approval. So that's my manager approving the process itself. Now we can actually move on to the external approval. So this is where obviously Nintex takes a bit of a step away from the Power Platform, and it's something, as far as I'm aware, is just not possible. Is being able to assign a task to request form filling from external parties, people outside of the organization itself. So it's really powerful having the ability to communicate with third parties, to communicate with contractors, to communicate with customers, but still be able to request information from them in controlled forms with complex logic inside them to help guide data gathering. That's a really powerful thing to obviously be able to do within any business, because that's how business is done nowadays, especially in the current climate. So we have our task, and this is the booking person scenario. So you have a travel request that's been raised to you to book, and I can click that. And again, I'm presented with the same Nintex form. But here I'm asked to provide some separate information. So I can say the booking airline number. So we'll just do BA 123456, and we'll say that it costs 120, and the hotel number we'll just say is MM098765, and then we'll say that that was 320. When we hit submit, that's going to complete fully. So that's the overall process itself. So if we go back to the actual screen, you can see the manager has already been approved, and then very shortly we should see that the booking completed should update to yes, as the workflow is running in the background and updating. So the idea of Nintex Workflow Cloud is, for the majority of the time, you shouldn't really know that it's there. You should be able to see all of your information and see that it's updated in real time as you're actually working on your item. So if I want to try and find out what's going on here, I'll be able to see. All in the meantime, I've been receiving email updates to tell me things have been completed. So I can see there's an email here to say that my request has been approved by Richard, and I can see that my booking has been completed and my reference numbers here as well. So you do have the ability to obviously notify and keep people up to date as to what's going on all the way through the process. And the power of Nintex is being able to do that not just in SharePoint, but also in other platforms. Is to be able to go to ServiceNow, to Jira to Salesforce, any other platform, and be able to update those systems and say, this is what's going on. So if we go back to Salesforce, we have a travel requests option here, and we should see we have a travel request that's just been logged through with our information. So this is where the finance team now has just received this information from exactly the same workflow, and it's all been done by Nintex Workflow Cloud. What does that look like inside of Nintex Workflow Cloud? So I'm going to very quickly go through the workflow I've just built, and then show you on a very, very brief way how I went about building it, and generally how long it takes to build a process like this. So the workflow I created looks like this on the canvas. So just to give you a bit of an orientation in Nintex Workflow Cloud, if you've never seen it before, on the left, we have all the different actions and connecting systems that we can talk to, of which there are very many, and we're increasing the number of them almost on a weekly basis now. And on the center, you have your conditional workflow. So at the top, you have the start event, and then every action that follows underneath depends on what happened in the previous. So here we have a decision task where the manager approves. If he approves it, it then updates the item to say that it's been approved. It sends an email to me saying that the manager is approved, and then it moves on to the second task. If I was to reject that, it would just end the workflow there. I could also send an email to say that it's been rejected, but I've chosen not to do that in this scenario because I'm never going to do it. One of the most important parts and one of the key parts of this is the start event. So once obviously the workflow is created, to change this, you have to do some things to make sure that you're no longer using any of the variables. But this workflow is configured to work off of SharePoint Online. So when a new item is created in a SharePoint Online list, I'm able to see that and then start a workflow automatically. I can do that based off of a new or even an update of an item with conditions, which is really powerful. So what we'll do is very, very quickly go through some of the steps that we took to actually kind of take this forward. So on a blank canvas, we have a start event. So that's the first thing you do is you always go straight to the start event and you pick, okay, how do you want to begin the Nintex workflow? So I could choose several different ways to actually make this work. I can either launch just from an Nintex form, so I could just design a form here and not use Power Automate, but that doesn't really work with my scenario because I already have a Power Automate form. I'm very happy with that, and I'm going to use that. We have a component workflow. So component workflows are being able to call an Nintex workflow just from an API. So that actually would work very well within a flow. So within a flow, if a certain path is taken, and say that process does involve third parties or other applications and systems, but I don't have the ability to do that in flow, you could use a Nintex workflow component to be able to do those specific actions and then return back to the flow after that's completed. In this scenario, I just use the one of our connectors, of which we have a few out of the box. I used a SharePoint Online connector. I picked when a new item is updated in a list. And then what happens is you create a connection to your SharePoint environment. So typically this can be anyone with edit permissions on that list, or at least an owner, hopefully, because it does give you the ability to do things like update the item and things like that. So I already have a connection set up, and I can use that same SharePoint site. So if we go back and pick my SharePoint area, once I tick that box, it's going to look up all of the lists that are available within that site. So we can go down to travel requests, and then we can pick some conditions. So if we wanted to, we could look at when certain values within that SharePoint list are true, and then be able to build some conditional logic to say, only run the workflow when those values are correct, or when those values are valid. So that's really good for things like splitting HR workflows from IT workflows. You could look at the department and then say, okay, if it's HR, run this workflow. If it's IT, run that workflow. So it's really helpful to be able to do that on condition. We don't have any conditions in this scenario, so we're not going to. And as soon as you do that, all of the information from the actual workflow and from the actual SharePoint site is loaded into Nintex straight away. So there's nothing you need to do to return that information. It's all there, ready and available for you. So these are all of the SharePoint columns that are available on that list. And I can use those as I want. The only set of information I don't have is the manager information. So to achieve that, I'm going to get the manager details. So I'm going to use one of our connectors, get manager details, and I'm going to gather the information for the workflow. So again, to be able to communicate with the system, I need a connection. So I have a connection through to Azure AD, and I'm going to provide the employee's email address. We can do that because we have the information from the starter form. We can use created by if we wanted to, or we could use the requester email, which is the specific field that we pre-filled with the people picker. And then what we want to do is store that again as another object. So we can say managers details and then create an insert. Again, in a very similar way, when you do the lookup, all of the information for that manager is now recorded back into the system. So when the workflow runs, these variables will be populated if they're accurate on Azure AD, and we'll be able to use this information going forward. Now we have the manager's details, we need to assign them a task. So we can go assign a task, and we can do a form-based approval, and we could say task approval for travel request. We can give multiple outcomes if we want. So say, for example, we wanted to add an additional outcome, we can say request information. We can have an additional branch for requesting information, and that's an output that the manager can choose to use. In this scenario, it's not necessarily required, but in some scenarios, it may be. We're going to have that. We're going to obviously assign that to the manager. So we can go to Active Directory, go to the manager's details, and we can get the manager's email address. There we go. Subject, travel request approval. And we're going to use some variables from the start event, like the title, just to be able to fill out the form a little bit. So we're going to use the title and the subject, and we're going to say hello and use some personalization as well. We're going to go to the manager and get his first name. So we're going to say hello, Richard, a new request. Travel request has been raised. Perfect. All of the form side of stuff is already pre-filled for you. So the link for that is already put into the email, which is very nice. If you want to, you can turn it off and have custom links. But for this scenario, it's perfectly fine to have it like this. One thing that obviously we can do as well is, should the request not be approved within a certain amount of time, we can set reminders and say every day that it will remind them that it needs to happen. You can even customize the email and get more aggressive in each one, which is a little fun. Or if, for example, obviously you can have subsequent reminders and just keep repeating until obviously it's completed. And then also, which we would always suggest, is have an escalation path, which is if it's not completed within a certain amount of time. This is really important for processes with SLAs, because you don't want to ever leave a scenario where, say, someone's out of office or they're not available or they missed it, that kind of thing. Hopefully the reminders should solve the last one. But this one will allow you to either do one or two different things. One, you'll either be able to auto-complete the workflow and say that they've not approved it. That's useful in scenarios where you're requesting, say, something from a senior manager, they've not approved it within 2 weeks. They're very unlikely to approve it. So the chances are the best way you can kind of proceed is just to reject it after 2 weeks, because it's not going to happen. Or alternately, you can reassign and delegate that automatically to someone else, which is this scenario. And that will actually allow you to be able to manage if someone, say, for example, is out of office or off sick. It'll go to someone else or a central mailbox, and they'll be able to reassign and approve it accordingly, which is really, really powerful. Within the forms designers, we actually have the ability to obviously have our own form. So we're going to design that. And by default, you'll just have the standard outcome. But all of the information from the start event is there. I'm not going to go through building the whole thing, but we are just going to take some simple stuff. So we're going to take the title. There we go, drag that in. There we go. Drag that down. I'm just going to say request title. And we'll have, say, for example, the date, so start date, and then end date. And then end date. We'll just stick with those ones for now. I just wanted to show you how easy it is for you to sort of start building out a form. All of everything is kind of handled on the side, so we can just add a label at the top if we want to as well. Travel request approval. There we go, and we can just set the size of that. So that's our task form in this scenario, and that's it, done. Obviously, we can choose to do things on a approve or reject. So on the reject, we're just going to end the workflow, and on the approve, we're going to send an email. Email. There we go. And we're going to send that to the initiator. And we're going to say travel request approved. Perfect. Hello, your travel request has been approved by Richard. So we can go back again because we know who's assigning it, who's working with it. We know his first name. We can use that as information. So it's very helpful. Again, obviously, a really important part is updating that SharePoint list. So we are going to update the SharePoint item. So we can search and see all of the SharePoint actions that we have available, which there are quite a lot. So you actually have the ability to do quite a lot on the SharePoint side. That includes completely managing the SharePoint in terms of adding, removing lists, items, updating items, changing permissions, all kinds of stuff, checking items in and out. Really powerful capability that we have, but we actually just want to update the item. And we just want to go back to our original item, pick our same connection, pick our same SharePoint URL, which we'll get from the start event. Ooh, did that copy? There we go. There we go. We can retrieve the same lists, go back to the actual travel requests, pick the field we want to update. So we want to say manager approved, and we want to set that to yes, because now the manager has been approved. And then the condition is how we target the item. So we're going to add a condition, and we're going to say when the ID of the item matches, and then we can insert the start event variable. So this is the original item that was originally used to create this workflow. We can save that condition. And if we wanted to, we can now store the updated version of that item. So the original started version is as it was, and that won't update as we're going along. But should we want to store this updated item with all the latest information, we can have another variable. We can have manager approved item, and that'll be the same object, and it'll have all of the information in terms of the ID and information that we're going to use to actually store that as well. So very helpful that obviously you can manage and maintain items as you're going along. And now we're actually going to the external approval section. So we can look at, again, assigning a task, and actually go to form-based again, and we can say, please complete a booking. We don't have any outcomes in this scenario. We just have the scenario where the person is just finishing a piece of work. So we just turn it off. So we can turn off the actual multiple outcomes, and it just becomes a complete action. Another option, obviously here, which is the assignee authentication, we can again turn that off, and we can use our Gmail email address. We can obviously use a variable in here as well, which obviously would lead to an external email address. But just in a scenario, I don't have that in a variable. I'm just going to hard code that in there just to show you that you do have that option. Keen-eyed people of you would have seen that when I started to type that, it attempted to return that value. That's because my environment is actually connected to Azure AD, so I can have a people picker to try and pick back users and look that up even outside of Azure. So if we go in here we go, and we can hard code the email address. and we say travel booking required. And then we go, hello, please complete the booking as per the form below. And that's it. So we can do that. We can design the form, and then we can just put the basic information such as the hotel name, the location, and we can have the airline. We then obviously want to request some information from them. So we're going to look at 2 text shorts. So we're going to look at gathering some information. So first we'll obviously have the airline booking reference. We'll have the hotel booking reference. And then obviously the actual costs. So we're going to use the currency field. And then again, we'll just copy that and then paste that in. The cool part about Nintex and when you're designing these forms is all of the variables, all the fields, all the columns and everything that you would need to supply these fields is all created in the background for you. So all I need to do is just design the form. There's nothing special or anything I have to pre-create first. This is something I've noticed from the Power App side, is that you have to make all the fields and make all the areas first before you do this, or make the variables first. When you add a field, that makes a variable. So as I apply these changes, I have that information. If I go into my variables now, I can see that complete a booking is there. I can see the form variables and all the values that I actually pasted in there are present. Something that I've not done is obviously I've incorrectly named these variables, so you can see that it's automatically appended it with a 1. So it obviously makes it so you can't obviously make a mistake. What I want to do is obviously just go back and modify that. So if we go into costs, and we can actually set the name differently to what the title is. So we can still keep the title as cost on the form, but we can say, for example, airfare cost. And we could have this one as hotel cost. Like that. When we apply the changes and then go back to the variables, we'll be able to see now that those variables have changed to airfare cost and hotel cost. So it allows you to identify and pick information specifically as you need it, which is very, very helpful and very useful. Again, what we want to do is obviously, again, update the item. So we are just going to copy and plagiarize what we did a bit earlier, but we're just going to change the field that we're targeting. So we're going to remove the manager, and we're going to add in, is the booking completed? And then we're going to set that one to yes. And that's it. So we're going to remove obviously the output. We don't need the output for this one. And then you can see that we've very quickly copied and pasted the action. I could have done the same thing for the task as well. I can copy and paste the task, and that includes all the form aspects as well. So if I build out a form in the manager one, I can copy that, paste it, and then just change it to suit my needs later on. And then obviously, finally, the last thing we want to do is again send an email. So we're going to copy an email. And we're going to say travel request, booking details, and we can say travel request has been completed, see details below. And this is where we're actually going to return that value back to the actual person. So we're going to look at complete the booking request, and we're going to take the airline reference number, and we're going to take the hotel booking reference number. We're going to just mark those. So airline reference, and then hotel reference. Great. And then last step, final step is update SharePoint, Salesforce, sorry. So we're going to look at Salesforce, and we have a few actions there as well. So create a record is what we're going to use. So as we drag that in, much in the same way that we interact with the SharePoint, you pick a connection to your SharePoint or your Salesforce environment. So I'm going to use mine, and then you pick an object. So objects work like lists, very similar sort of scenario. We're just going to wait for that to load. We have quite a lot of them. And again, we have travel requests. Once you add that in, all of the fields are then available within that. So we're going to pick all of that information. We don't need that one. There we go. We can add all those details. So all we need to do now is fill out all this information. So we can insert that. We have the airline reference ID from here. We have the airline itself from the start event. Is it approved? It's yes, because we know that it's been approved by the manager. The estimated hotel cost, we can again take that from this one. So we can do hotel cost, estimated airfare, hotel booking ID. Justification comes from the start event. I think most of the rest of the information now comes from there. So travel request name, we'll do as the title. Reason for travel. See, I'm getting lost in my own environment here. We've got quite a few. There we go. Reason for travel. Request to email. Request their email. Request their full name. So we'll just put the display name in there. The travel end date and the travel start date. And then again, much like in the other actions, we can choose to return that variable back. So if we create that Salesforce item, when it's created, the ID of that record and everything can be stored back into the workflow. If we want to continue doing things with it, like send notifications to people inside of Salesforce that those have been updated. But in general, we've just completely recreated that whole workflow that I demonstrated to you earlier within 20 minutes or so. And that's me talking you through it. So in my own time, obviously just doing that with a very minimal amount of training, you could build a workflow just like this within a couple of hours, no trouble. With that, there's not too much to show you anymore. I'm at the end of the demo. So we're going to move on to some Q&A. So we'll move back to that. Thank you very much for looking at my demo.
Thanks, Jake. Yes, and thanks for a great presentation. And now we will start the questions and answers part. Should you wish to ask a question, please type it into the question window now. Okay, we have a question in, Jake, so let me just get it here for you. It's, can you provide another few examples of where Power Automate and Nintex are used together?
Yeah, hey so yeah, Matt, you're probably better at this one.
No worries. I'll give you a couple of examples that I've worked with customers on. One was with a customer feedback process. So what the customer wanted to do was to be able to use Power Automate to monitor Twitter, and in particular to be able to monitor particular posts. So in Twitter, in Power Automate, there's a template that enables you to, I think it's called notify me about negative Twitter posts or something like that. So using Power Automate to go and be the trigger point. Then inside of Power Automate, using some of the capabilities in there to then pass that up to sentiment analysis in order to go and get some scoring back. And then once we've got the tweet and the score, if that is something that we then want to take a look at, then we call off to NWC to then do the triage of that and pass it around the team. So if it's something which is a really good score, then they were passing off to one of their media teams that might then get in touch with the Get a Case, that might then get in touch with the customer to say, hey, glad you really enjoyed it, et cetera, et cetera. If it was really negative, then they wanted to know about it because that might be a complaint, and then use that and actually pass it off into their NWC customer complaint management system, which then manage and track that complaint through to successful conclusion and make sure they're kind of keeping an eye on their social profiling, which was pretty cool. I guess I think another example, which is done quite a lot, is contract management. So using Power Automate to do some of that monitoring of shared drives. So as I mentioned into my beginning session, if you've got people who've got Box or Google Drive, for example, or maybe people sending in emails into Gmail, then getting the contents of that out. So it might be a signed contract, etc., or a contract request, but then actually passing that off through to NWC to say, now go and manage my contract management process, please, and go and do the review cycles, the approvals, go and generate vnext to that contract using NWC document gen, go and get that, send it out through NWC signing, and then pull it back in and store it wherever it needs to go and do. So those are a couple of examples that I've worked with customers on.
Super.
Yeah.
Okay, a question in here. Whether using Power Automate or NWC, can you use an existing request as template for a new one? As in, if I need to travel at the same location every month, I would only want to change the dates.
Yeah, so both tools have the ability to obviously template out like that, and you can build logic in the forms to allow you to do those sort of things on a schedule basis, or obviously you can build a workflow to make life a little easier for you. So it really just depends on the process that you want to follow and the specifics around it, and whether it fits into the overall workflow that sits behind. But yeah, it should be able to do it.
Super. A few questions in around the same topic. Is there a sandbox of Nintex? Where can I try out Nintex? How do I get a demo of Nintex?
So if you go to Nintex's website, nintex.com, it'll probably take you very quickly into requesting a trial for it. So if you just go to our website and request a trial, choose Nintex Workflow Cloud, and you'll be able to get access to Nintex Workflow Cloud within a few minutes.
Super. A few comments come in just saying that they had some questions, but the presentation, I had some questions, but which were related to NWC, but were answered during the presentation. A good presentation, thank you very much. So that's great to see. And then the last question I have here is, what about other areas of the Power Platform and Nintex not covered today, for example, Power BI?
Hey guys. Yeah, so I mean, as I mentioned, both platforms have got a lot that sit in there, and there are some areas where we actually there's really good synergy in there. So one is, I mean, Power BI, we know provides great analytics capabilities, and NWC can provide a great capability to capture that data and use that data inside of your Power BI reports, etc. And then there are other areas that we haven't gone into today, like logic apps, etc., and bits and pieces that are a bit of a deeper conversation. And so, I would say to people on watching today or watching on demand, if you're interested in anything you've seen today, you've got any questions, or if you want to know about, again, the wider set, just get in touch with us, and we'd be delighted to do a bit of a deeper dive with you on this topic.
Super, thank you, Andrew. Well, on behalf of the ESPC community, thank you, Andrew and Jake, for taking the time today to complete this webinar. We really do appreciate it.
Wonderful, thank you.
No problem, thanks.
Thanks, guys. Okay, everybody, that is the end of today's webinar. Don't forget that ESPC 21 Online was a phenomenal learning experience delivered by the top experts on the planet. Now, by popular demand, we are delighted to introduce the ESPC 21 Online On-Demand Pass. At just €79, hit rewind today at sharepointeurope.com. This is the end of the webinar today. Please find this webinar and more at sharepointeurope.com/resource-center. Thank you for joining us today, and a big thank you to Andrew Murphy and Jake Dennison from Nintex. Take care and goodbye.